Story 1. Number 1. At the age of 16, my family and I relocated to Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Shortly after our move, I secured a job as a busboy at an Italian restaurant. On my inaugural night, as I diligently cleaned tables in the dining area, I was beckoned over to a specific table. Seated there were two men, both appearing to be in their late 30s, dressed quite typically for the middle class. Earlier, as I passed their table, I couldn't help but notice their stillness, devoid of conversation and animation. Regardless, I approached their table as requested. The man who signaled me gestured for me to lean closer to him. Assuming he needed assistance or to communicate with his server, I slightly leaned forward. However, to my surprise, he asked me an unexpected question. "Have you ever had your initials carved into your forehead?" In retrospect, I should have responded with a witty remark like, "Well, not that I can recall," but the randomness and peculiarity of the question caught me off guard. Despite my usual cluelessness with social cues or jokes, I nervously chuckled and scanned his face for any signs of humor. All I received, though, was a blank stare. His friend remained silent and avoided eye contact. Perplexed, I shook my head and walked away. Venturing into the kitchen, I sought out the server for that table. Describing the strange encounter, I inquired about the peculiar behavior of those two men. "Oh yeah, I don't know, but they're __, weird." Undeterred, I continued with my duties, attempting to avoid that particular table. However, the men lingered for an extended period, as motionless as before. I can't even recall them consuming anything. Perhaps they did so while I was occupied elsewhere in the restaurant. While cleaning a table near theirs, the same man motioned me over once again. Conflicted, I hesitated, not wanting a repeat of the earlier bizarre experience. Yet, fearing repercussions for declining a customer's request on my first night, I approached the table once more. This time, he wanted me to lean close so he could share something with me. For reasons unknown to me, I obliged. He then asked, "Have you ever had two men pin you down and grab your throat?" That was my cue to hastily distance myself from those unsettling individuals. Whether they were under the influence of something or not, the eerie tone of his voice and their vacant stares left me disturbed. Without delay, I reported the incident to the general manager, who nonchalantly shrugged it off. Working until 2:00 a.m., I found myself in the absurd situation of asking the bartender to ensure my safe journey back to my car in the dimly lit parking lot. Though the story may elicit laughter when recounted, the encounter left me genuinely disturbed, marking a rather unfavorable first impression of Florida. Story 2. 2 years ago, I briefly worked as a host at a not-so-popular restaurant. Due to our lack of popularity, we weren't busy very often. One afternoon shift, I noticed a customer drought when an elderly, short, and stocky man entered. He requested a table near a window, and I seated him in my friend Maria's section. Waitresses had their designated 3 to 4 table sections to ensure fair distribution of customers. Maria, a college-aged waitress, attended to this man who appeared to be 65 or older. My hosting position allowed me to be close enough to overhear a conversation that progressively became stranger. The man mentioned working for a towing service, seemingly far beyond retirement age. His compliments started innocently, praising Maria's smile and waitress skills. However, they took a bizarre turn, with comments like, "With a body like that, you must have a boyfriend," or "I wish my ex-wife looked like you." At one point, Maria felt him attempting to grab her, prompting her discomfort. She eventually had our male friend Chad take over, pretending her shift was over and hiding until he left. When Chad became his waiter, the man's demeanor shifted from cheerful to genuinely angry. Fearful, I, around Maria's age, worried he might target me next. Surprisingly, he finished his meal without speaking or looking at Chad, leaving silently. The man left a $5 tip in ones, each with Maria written on it, front and back, presumably to avoid any confusion with Chad. Our manager allowed Maria to avoid serving the man due to his inappropriate behavior. Days later, he returned, specifically asking for Mariah. With her shift hours away, I informed him I would have to seat him with another waiter, but he refused, insisting on waiting in her section for over an hour. When the manager intervened, the man left without a word. The restaurant's main phone line, located at the host stand, allowed us to handle reservations. The man called the next day, requesting to speak to Mariah. Recognizing his voice, I feigned ignorance and asked, "Can I ask who's calling?" His curt response was, "No, put her on." Consulting my manager, he answered the call, posing as the manager. After a brief pause, he informed the man that Mariah wasn't present and offered to take a message. The man's response, unheard by me, left the manager visibly disturbed, prompting him to hang up without further communication. Despite our efforts to avoid him, the man persisted in asking for Mariah until we informed him she no longer worked there. Fortunately, he never returned. The nature of his problem remains unknown, but for Mariah's sake, I hope he stays away. Story 3. Let me clarify that this account isn't mine but belongs to a colleague I share shifts with. I'm employed as a waiter at TGI Fridays, and the focus of this narrative is a fellow server. Let's refer to her as Beth. Beth, a pleasant individual, ranks around 7 or 8 on the attractiveness scale, though such judgments are subjective, varying from person to person. In the course of my duties, welcoming and escorting customers to their tables, a distinctive pattern emerged. A particular customer consistently requested Beth's service. Initially, I tolerated this as the customer is always right, and it wasn't uncommon for patrons to prefer specific servers. So I'd fetch Beth, and she'd attend to him. The frequency of his visits increased, and it evolved from a routine occurrence to a cause for discomfort on Beth's part. Teasing banter among the waitstaff about Beth's newfound admirer became customary. While Beth continued serving him, the situation escalated. The customer began making unwelcome advances, engaging in small talk, and even providing his phone number. Naively, I suggested she exploit the situation for the generous tips he left. My advice, in hindsight, proved misguided, leading to an unfortunate progression of events. With a more flexible work schedule, I transitioned to an evening shift, working from 6:00 p.m. to closing time at 2:00 a.m. This schedule, shared with Beth, afforded us a laid-back atmosphere after midnight, with fewer customers. Coincidentally, we became aware of a persistent presence near a nearby 7-Eleven, typically associated with a blue Civic. Identifying him as the persistent customer, Beth's unease heightened, prompting a collective effort to ensure her safety. In a chance encounter with the customer outside of work, he inquired about job opportunities. While sharing information about job applications, he veered into inappropriate territory, asking about Beth's relationship status and expressing undue interest in her. Sensing red flags, I provided a vague response, insinuating she was already involved. Communicating this encounter to Beth inadvertently escalated her anxiety. As Beth's discomfort intensified, precautions were taken. Colleagues and I would accompany her to her car, ensuring her safety during late shifts. On a day when she ventured alone, I discreetly followed at a distance. Observing a suspicious blue Civic tailing her, I alerted her to take an extended route home. Following her closely, the stalker persisted until she reached her residence. My presence inadvertently averted a potential threat, a fact that became evident as she tearfully expressed gratitude upon realizing her follower had vanished. Beth continued her employment at TGI Fridays, but adjusted her shift, avoiding late-night closures. Remarkably, the unwelcome customer ceased his unsettling visits. The hope lingers that this reprieve persists, recognizing that fear can be a constant companion.